I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome to the Great Gift Sew Along. We wanted to get crafty with you as the holiday season approaches, so I've put together the best of our best patterns for you to make handcrafted gifts for your loved ones with ease and joy. We'll be making Perfect Pouches by Lazy Girl Designs, Rock Candy Table Topper by Jaybird Quilts, Sweetpea Pods by Lazy Girl Designs, and finishing up with the Candy Dish Pillow by Jaybird Quilts. In our last two videos, we worked on fabric selection and cutting, and today we're going to work on piecing our pillow. So let's get started. Candy dish is assembled in rows. We're going to work on one row at a time so that we can best pay attention to that row and make sure that we don't flip anything, change the orientation. We worked hard doing all of our fussy cutting and want to keep things exactly how we have them. So I'm going to slide my second, third, and fourth rows down. We're going to start with this first row. And here is where we want to make sure we keep orientation. We have this deer. We could easily turn it. He could be facing that way, down that way, totally upside down. Some of the prints, it won't matter as much if that happens. The ladybugs can be reversed like that, or this fox can go a few different ways. But some of them, like the deer, it's really important that we keep it in the orientation that we had intended. So follow your pattern, and we are going to begin to sew the triangles onto the hexagons to create a couple different shapes. This is going to create a jewel, a diamond, a diamond. This is going to create a diamond with a little bit of an extra piece. Everything can be pinned right now except for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and take my glass pins and flip my pieces on. And if you've been around for some of my other sew-alongs, you know that generally I'm not a big pinner, but this is one that I want to make sure that I sew the triangle on the correct side of the hexagon. And if I don't pin, there's a good chance that I'm going to mess one up because it's just going to somehow get shifted around. So there's that one. Then I'm going to flip this. And since they're on opposite sides, we can pin them at the same time and sew both before we move on. I am going to continue the process to pin all of the pieces in my top row and then head on over to the machine and begin sewing my top row. And then once my top row is complete, then I'll continue on to row 2. I'm at my machine and I'm ready to begin piecing my candy dish. I have my machine settings to a scant 1/4 inch seam. Scant is just one thread over from a true 1/4 inch. If you've never sewn with a scant 1/4 inch seam before, I've got a link below to more information. What it does is it accounts for the amount of thread that will be in the seam allowance so that when your pieces are pieced together, they will be the true fit that you want them to be and measure accurately. I'm going to start by sewing onto a leader ender. It helps you avoid that thread nest. I am using Aurifil 2600. It's my favorite. Medium gray, works really well, blends into things. So I'm going to grab my pieces, and I already have them pinned. I like to take the pins out when I get to the machine. The pins are not here to keep my alignment perfect. The pins were here to tell me which side I wanted it on. If you want to leave your pins in, as long as you're not sewing directly over your pins, that's okay. So I'm going to get that perfectly lined up. And I don't find a need to backstitch at the beginning or the end. Since this is a top row, if you would like to backstitch at the beginning, if that helps you, feel free to go ahead and do that. And I'm simply going to chain piece. And I know my alignment because of my blunt corners, and I know my placement because of my pins. So that's the second piece. Now I'm going to get the third piece, and I'm going to come back to sew this one so that I don't waste any thread. I'm just going to keep going, making some progress. Here is the fourth one in this row. Now I'm going to grab my snips. These are Tula Pinks little snips. I like them because they have a spring action that opens them, so it's less work on your hand. I'm simply going to snip my pieces apart. As you see, just tiny little chains, so limited waste of thread. And this one just has one, so I'm going to set this one aside. But since both of these have another piece, I'm just going to continue my process to add another piece to them. Oh, forgot to take the pin out first on that one. I prefer taking them out first, but either way works. I find that if there's something I need to adjust, I do a little better at doing that without the pins. And generally speaking, I just don't pin a lot. Okay. So again, just gonna snip. Now I have my first piece done and my second piece done. And I'm putting them back over to my little mini design wall area to keep them in the correct order. Okay. Now, I do have one extra piece to add to this, but since it is under the machine, I'm going to go ahead and take it out and show you how we're going to do that. Now I like to press my seams open. It helps everything to lay flat, and with this project and most 60-degree projects, there's nothing that will nest, so there really is no benefit to pressing them to one side or the other. So I'm simply going to open it, and first I just kind of finger press it open with my nail. And then I have a seam roller. This is the Violet Craft seam roller. I really love this. It helps at the machine to keep things nice and flat without having to turn my iron on. I do eventually turn my iron on, but when I'm working with small things like this, I like to keep going when possible, when it's not going to interfere with construction. So this is my last triangle, and if you look in your pattern, this is eventually going to be trimmed off once it's quilted, so you don't really need to worry about this area so much, but you're just going to focus on the fact that the triangle down here lines up. So that's where it goes. And you can just start your seam up here, or you can start from this end and then finish. I know it feels a little unnatural, possibly, to be sewing something that is not the same length, both pieces, but it's okay. I'm going to trim my leader ender and sew back onto that one more time so I can get this last piece out. So now here I have all 4 of my pieces that I've done so far, and so I'm just going to continue to press the rest of the seams open. I could get my iron going at this point, but I think I'm just going to stick with my seam roller for now. So this one here, I like to flip this one in, but not force that tiny bit in, kind of cause that curl to kind of open the seam. If you've ever pressed one way and twisted a 4-patch, that's what it kind of feels like here. So there's that piece. So you can see that. And then this is the next one. And by working right next to my machine, I am giving myself the ability to make sure that I line these back up and don't twist them. Another really good tip here is how we talked about in the fabric selection to use our cell phone as a tool and to snap photos of where we wanted to do fussy cutting. That's a great tool here as well. I will always, almost always, snap a photo of my layout once I have decided where my pieces are going. And that way, if I forget, I can always reference back to that photo and see exactly where I had planned on the deer going, where the bear was, and get everything back to where I wanted it. So that's my 4, 3, 2, and then my first one just has 1 triangle. Okay, so the next step is to piece this into an entire row. And the blunt corners come in handy again because we're going to piece these together and we know exactly where to place everything. Right there and right there. And then here in the middle, if you were doing a traditional 4-patch, you would line those seams up. But this is not squares or rectangles. So I'm going to pin the edges and then show you kind of where the middle ends up. There is 1 double check to look for. So here in the middle, what you're going to have is your pressed open seam allowance on this side is going to line up with your seam on that side. And then the same in this case. So my pressed open purple, that exact point is going to line up with that exact seam. So when you look at it from this side, you're going to have 4 layers right in the middle there, just like that. So I don't pin the middle in this case. You can if you find it helpful. I just pin the ends. Again, I am mainly pinning to keep track of which pieces go to which pieces. I'll just show you that again. Line up that blunt corner with the edge of the hexagon. And right there in the middle, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and the point of this seam allowance lines up perfectly with my seam there. So now that I have these pinned, I'm going to head back on over to the machine. And in this case, I was focusing on showing you this, so it looks like I put 1 pin on either side. And you never want to sew over pins, so it's hard if you have them on the back. So I'm going to move that real quick to the front. Sewing over pins can damage your needle, can damage your plate, they can fly up at your face or yourself, and you may or may not be wearing glasses. It's just not a good practice to really have. So nice and slow. And I do have a stiletto. These seams are not pressed as flat as they normally would be if I had turned my iron on. So I'm going to make sure to use my stiletto to hold things down, make sure nothing flips. Take this one out. I'm going to do the same thing with this set. Just going to double check, make sure everything's lined up where it should be. Just how we talk about measure twice, cut once. This is also one of those line up twice, sew once. It's better to take a little bit extra time to make sure things are lined up properly and you don't have to get your seam ripper out than it is to rush the sewing and have to come back and fix something. That doesn't mean you'll never have to fix something. We're all human after all. But I have found the more careful, close attention I pay in the piecing, the less trouble I have down the road when it comes to taking things out. I'm going to open these back up, and I actually don't need to worry about pressing these seams yet because nothing is sewing onto them. So I am going to take care of all of that when I'm done my row. Now I'm just going to focus on this one seam here in the middle. So just like we did for the first two, I'm going to flip it on top of itself, pin this in place, and head on over to the machine. Now that I have finished piecing this, it's time to go ahead and press it. One quick note before I press. You will find that sometimes you get things lined up perfectly, and sometimes things are off by a tiny bit. It's up to you the margin of error that you're comfortable with. I think because these blend into the background, it doesn't bother me as much that this one is off. If it was more high contrast colors like this, I might take it out. But overall, I'm happy with this, so I'm going to stick with it. I don't think it's something that you'll see from a distance, but if that bothers you, go ahead, take out that seam, and redo it. Now I'm going to flip it over to the back, and I'm going to go ahead and press these seams. I've already pressed them open with my seam roller, so now I just have to press them with my iron. If you've been around before, you know I talk about ironing versus pressing. This is pressing, where we go up and down and we move. This is ironing. We iron clothes. We do not iron quilt blocks. Ironing like that can distort our blocks. So we like to go up and down. You can do a little bit of a wiggle, but you never want to push it. That push can really distort your blocks, especially when we're working with bias. And one other thing that can come in handy is a heat-resistant stiletto. This end is silicone and heat-resistant, so it can touch your iron where your fingers can't. Don't touch this end because this end is plastic. But if you need help holding your seam open, you can use your heat-resistant stiletto, and it can get super close to your iron and even touch your iron without any damage. After I press from the back, I like to flip it over and give a good press from the front as well. And now that I have this one done, I'm going to repeat my steps to piece and press my remaining 3 rows. I have finished piecing each of my rows and pressing all of my seams, and now it is time to sew my 4 rows together to complete my pillow top. Now, when you are sewing things that have square or rectangular blocks, it's easy to know where to line them up. It's a little bit different with this, so I'm going to show you what I use to line things up. So I'm going to take the first 2 rows, I'm going to flip them right sides together. And what we're looking for is very similar to when we were piecing this section to this section, is that, let me get nice and close so you can see it. This part of the seam allowance here is going to match with that seam. So let me show you, it's going to look like that. And we're going to have the 4 pieces right there. So I'm going to take a pin, put it right there. And we're going to continue that all the way down at every intersection. So again, that seam allowance is going to match up with that seam right there. We're going to match the raw edges and pin. And as I've said before, I'm generally not a big pinner, but at this stage I am, because I want to make sure that these intersections line up as best as possible to give the desired effect of the quilt. So I want to make sure that all my hard work shows. So I'm going to take the time to pin each one of these intersections and then head on over to the machine. I'm now going to piece together the 2 rows that I just pinned. I'm going to sew nice and slow. I want to make sure I don't flip any seams, don't make any mistakes. There's no hurry at this point. I'm going to use my stiletto to help me make sure none of my seams flip. And pull out my pins as I go, and I'll pull them out ahead of time if I think that they're too close to my needle, because I never want to sew over a pin. And you'll see that here it looks like this one is a little bit off from this one, and that's okay. Piecing is not perfect, and what I'm more concerned about is that things are matching up here. I can do a little bit of pull with my stiletto, but things like that tend to wash out in the seam allowance. I'm still using my same scant 1/4 inch that I've been using all along. And now my top piece is longer than my bottom piece, so I just need to make sure that I get past there. If you would like to start and stop, do some back stitching at the beginning and end of the seam, since there is no borders going on here, you can do that. I didn't do it at the beginning, but I'm going to do it right there. I am going to take my bottom 2 rows, piece them, and in the same way, and then I will add them to this, and then I will go ahead and press my pillow top. Now that I have pieced all of my rows, it's time to go ahead and press them. And I am going to continue to press them open. You could press them up or down if you prefer. At this point, I'm going to continue to press them open. So again, I'm just going to open them with my nail, give a little bit of a finger press, and then I'm going to use my heat-resistant stiletto and walk along my piece. And when I say walk, I kind of mean up and down. As we walk, we don't want to push. No ironing here, just pressing. I'm going to repeat that for each of the seams. Once I have pressed my seams on the back, I like to press from the front as well. And when I am not recording, I like to press with steam. I don't do that when I'm recording because it fogs up the camera. But I do like to press with steam. Personal preference. If you like it, I suggest go ahead. If you're not a fan, that's okay too. So give it a good press from the front. Thank you for tuning in today. If this video was helpful for you, please like it, share your comments with us, and click here to subscribe to this channel. Here are the links to the Great Gift Sew Along videos and some of my other videos you might like. Sign up to receive the Sew Along emails and worksheets at the link posted in the video description below. In our next video, we'll go over quilting and finishing for the candy dish pillow. See you soon!